Hello everyone, how are you going? And welcome to the Secrets of Canada's Tap Water Explained. Now, I don't know what that even means. Is it good? Is it bad? But I guess it's a secret no longer.
It's a public health crisis of massive proportions.
Negative.
You've probably heard about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan.
It's possible every single person living in Flint may have been exposed to lead through the city's contaminated water supply.
The state knew about it and did nothing.
Of the water supply in Flint, Michigan has sparked outrage across the country.
In Canada, people are also unknowingly consuming dangerous amounts of lead from their drinking water. In some cities, lead levels were found to be comparable to those of Flint at the height of its water crisis.
Wait, what? What have I dived into here? This is not what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be good tap water like glacial tap water or something, not negative, but that's insane that some of these cities are getting tested and they're getting tested at the same levels that Flint was when it was shut down. So my interest has certainly been piqued, and let's continue to see how many people are affected by this. And now I'm wondering, does Sydney have this? I can only assume not, but I guess if no one knows in Canada, then there's no reason to assume that Sydney wouldn't either.
We're probably talking about hundreds of thousands of people in the population of Canada that right now, every time they open their taps, there's a good chance that they're getting a little bit of lead coming out of that pipe.
Canadians are not being informed on when lead levels are high, not only in their homes, but in their schools and daycares.
That's Mike and Megan. They've been part of this huge year-long investigation that has involved around 130 university students and journalists who have all been investigating lead-contaminated water in Canada.
I think people are completely in the dark.
Well, yeah, I can only imagine they would be, because I wouldn't exactly be turning on my tap if I knew that, oh yeah, here we go, that's just a little bit of a dosage of lead every single time I do it. I mean, I'm now wondering where this lead is coming from, because I'm fairly sure with Flint it came from a spill, but is this coming from people's pipes, in terms of people's old lead pipes and transport mechanisms, or is it just kind of industrial contamination? That's what's going on here? Because even though they're currently only focusing on lead, I can only assume or only imagine that if there's lead in there, there's probably other heavy metals mixed in there as well.
Lead has been mined for thousands of years. It was used in ancient Rome to make water pipes because the metal is flexible, highly corrosion resistant, and cheap. Lead pipes continued to be used around the world for centuries, and eventually lead was added to other common products like gasoline and paint. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that people started to notice that it was making everyone really sick. Lead exposure in children has been linked to behavioral problems and a loss of IQ. In adults, it can cause high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney disease, and reduced fertility. Ongoing exposure to even low levels of lead can be toxic.
Yeah, by modern day standards, it's a little bit difficult to understand how much lead was really present in day-to-day life, from paint to fuel to pipes. Like, all of these things had lead in them and people were just using them because that's what the product was. And like they said, it makes sense from a working point of view. It's easily workable, it's very malleable, so you can bend it and shape it and do all things like this massive top hat looking thing. I mean, I can only assume that it's not going to be a top hat because that would be a very heavy hat, but look, just bare hands on that lead, working with it for 10 hours a day, hammering and bashing and making all these fine filaments that are just going to be absorbed straight through your skin into your blood, and so no wonder people were getting sick by this thing. Some of these poor people were just working with it for days on end and years on end and decades on end.
I would say up until the 1970s, a lot of our major cities were still using lead pipes and putting them into the ground.
In the 1970s, we started banning lead, which is why there has been a steady decline in lead blood levels since.
Lead is one that I think a lot of people thought was a solved problem, but it's not.
I just want to take it back to here. What do they say? Lead was detected in blood in almost 100% of the population. I mean, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But blood levels in Canadians have declined over 70% since 1978 to 1979. Wow, that's a definitely good statistic to be having there. This decline is attributed to the successful phase out of lead in gasoline, which I really don't understand. Why did you need a heavy metal in fuel to make it, I guess, the combustion work or something like that? I really have no idea why that was ever needed, and how have they gone about phasing it out? Because if it was needed before, has it still been needed but they just substitute it with something else, or is it just a new formula entirely? Either way, it also includes lead-based paints and lead solder in food cans. Wow, okay, then in addition to other government regulations and industry action over this time period. Okay, so yeah, there's no way I could have read all of that before, but it's definitely necessary to understand how far we've come, because at least you're not worried about it these days to the same extent that they should have been worried about it back in the day.
There are two ways lead is getting into people's drinking water. The first is that old lead pipes are aging. Water is naturally corrosive and causes pipes to break down over time, allowing lead to seep into people's water.
They were largely used not as
Big
part of
one.
the city's main distribution network, but rather the portion of the lines that connect the water mains to the properties.
You might live in an old home and you may have replaced your pipes, but it doesn't mean that you're free and in the clear unless the city has replaced their portion of the lead service line too.
You know, one of the people we interviewed said, just imagine drinking your water with a 30-foot lead straw.
The second way.
What an analogy. A 30-foot long lead straw. I mean, yeah, it definitely makes sense from this little graph that they were showing that I don't know where that would have been from because it's obviously in black and white 4x3. Now it has got me wondering though, what was the main line? Would it have been a concrete spun pipe? No, I don't think that would have been a thing, and metal would be really, really difficult to use, so maybe a terracotta pipe? In my mind that would make the most sense, but then why would you switch from terracotta to lead? And I don't know how you would ever make that join, and so yeah, I have no idea. I'd love to know, and hopefully they even say it.
The second way is through acidic source water, which is any water that has a pH level below 7.
Yeah.
It can cause lead to leach into the water from either pipes containing lead or lead soldering.
Yeah, right.
Lead is measured in parts per billion. Health Canada's guideline for acceptable lead levels in drinking water is 5 parts per billion.
Whoa, I must admit, I've never heard of parts per billion mentioned before. It's only ever been parts per million or maybe parts per thousand. But I guess when you're talking about lead in drinking water, you definitely don't want to be having parts per million. That'll probably be a little bit too many, especially when saying 5 parts per billion is the recommended or the safe guidelines. I mean, it is almost impossible to fathom how little lead that really is. Like, it's 5 parts per billion. You know, what could you buy with $5 compared to what could you buy with $1 billion? It's just not even in the same realm. But hey, I guess I paused it too soon, so let's see how many parts per, I can only assume 1,000 or million are they going to have in their water supplies?
Health Canada's guideline for acceptable lead levels in drinking water is 5 parts per billion.
Crazy.
But both Health Canada and the World Health Organization agree that there is no safe level of lead. And the way some cities are testing for lead is problematic too.
Oh, what? They didn't tell us.
In some places, when officials are testing for lead, they do what's called a flush test, where you let taps run for 5 minutes before gathering a water sample.
That's not actually how you drink the water, so it might not be an accurate description of what your lead levels are going to look like when you are taking that first glass of water in the morning.
It's a test designed to identify whether there's a problem in the city's water, but it's not going to capture what we need to know for public health.
Oh, that is such a massive difference. And why would they be doing that? I mean, I guess like they said, it depends what they are testing for. Are they testing for a lead contamination upstream, or are they just going, oh, yep, no worries, it's lead free? But then that doesn't tackle the problem of people just opening up their tap for 5 seconds at a time. Let's say once an hour, 5 seconds, 10 seconds at a time, not for 5 minutes, let alone overnight when you just have that water sitting there for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, whatever it may be. It's just going to be collecting as much lead as possible and then just ready to deliver it to you first thing in the morning. And so like I said, I understand why you were testing for the upstream one, but why don't you also test for the downstream one to see, oh, do I have to replace that 30-foot long straw or 10-meter long straw for anyone that uses real measurements?
Even based on flush tests, lead levels in Montreal still reached an average comparable to levels in Flint when similar testing was done there.
Wow, so it is actually parts per billion even when it is heavily contaminated. Like they said, 5 was kind of a kind of safe level, even though there isn't a safe level, or I guess it's an acceptable level but not deemed safe. But then Flint and Montreal were reading 7.6 and 7.3 parts per billion respectively. That's insane, especially after 3 and 5 minutes of just running the water. Like, that's virtually cleared surely everything out. And so I guess in that case you are diagnosing and hopefully addressing an upstream problem because you need to get rid of all of it or as much as possible. But what about the other, I don't know, 10 million parts per billion that are coming through the 30-foot long pipe?
In Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and 3 cities in Saskatchewan, the investigation found that average lead levels exceeded Health Canada's guideline of 5 parts per billion.
Even after a 6-hour standing test, they were getting 10.1, 12.8, 25, and 31. That is 6 times over the acceptable limit, and they're just like, oh yeah, that's what our water is. Like, what are you meant to be doing in that circumstance? Because as they said in the video, it is most likely not the people's own plumbing that is causing these issues. It is all the infrastructure that the city has put in, and so they're just letting it sit there. That's ridiculous. They should definitely have that realigned, for goodness sake, when you're having 31 and 25 and 12.8 and 10.1.
You know, in Montreal, like, people were getting tested by the city. They were told, because of the testing method used, that they had a low level or an acceptable level. And then we went back and tested with different methods that are that are recommended by Health Canada,
Probably
and we
holistic.
found much higher levels. So I think it's an issue about transparency versus secrecy.
Yeah. The entire thing is such a just undercover organization, isn't it? It's just the fact that they recognize it as being detrimental to people's health, but then also go, we're going to use this testing method to skew the results.
There's no real federal oversight on lead levels in water.
Right.
Health Canada has set its limit, but then leaves it up to the provinces to enforce them.
And that's why we're having discrepancies in different cities across the country, where there's one quality in this city versus another quality in another city.
And only Ontario makes data on lead levels public. Nothing currently
Wow.
requires provinces to share testing data with residents, and often they don't.
Everybody has the right to know exactly what's in their drinking water, especially if it is deemed unsafe.
Exactly that. As you know, let's say even with food, we have so much regulation and policing about what is in it, exactly all the ingredients. You have to know this, this, and this, and if there's anything wrong with it, you can bring it back. They do recalls on food all the time. And so it is such a strange discrepancy that they're having here. Like if you found out there was probably 31 parts per billion in broccoli, they would definitely recall all the broccolis because they go, oh, that's not a safe level. But when it's water and then you're just drinking it every day, we'll just use a different testing method. And when was this video made? 2019. Okay then, so even that, the fact that there has been so much public data just out there in the world over the last few years about this, this, and this, and this, that something like this should be child's play for them to be able to report. They know what's in the water. They've done a couple of tests at residential homes and they just go, oh yeah, it's between this range and this range if you live in this city. I mean, that would definitely make them have to do something about it, but then they have to do something about it, so I guess everyone's a winner. I've just been having a quick look to see if I can find anything or how much Sydney has. I went to Australia, I went to Sydney Water, there's all these different things that you can do. I even found this document that references guidelines for Canadian Drinking Water Health Canada 2020, as well as New Zealand and a whole bundle of other things. Even this, the World Health Organization uses a risk assessment calculation that would give rise to a risk of 1 additional cancer per 100,000 people. So of course there's always a risk, but it's interesting to see that it's 1 per 100,000. That's where they're willing to draw the line. Here we go.
One of the things that cities are doing right now is adding something called orthophosphate to their drinking water. Essentially, it's an anti-corrosive and it coats pipes over time. So if you do have lead pipes, it's kind of mitigating any issue that you might have with your drinking water, which means that more lead service lines aren't being replaced because orthophosphate is actually doing its job.
In some cases, cities are offering free filters, whether it's a water pitcher with a special filter for lead, or whether it's a filter you can add onto your tap. The ultimate solution, all the experts have told us, you have to replace the lead pipes.
Yeah, funny that. I feel like that's exactly what I would want if I was living in those cities instead of having to deal with filtering the lead out of my water. Why don't you just never put it in there in the first place? I mean, I like the idea of not having lead in the water anymore, but surely there is a better way than just putting another chemical and another thing in the water. I've seen trucks and things driving around before that offer relining of pipes where they put a pipe inside the old pipe, and so then you just have, let's say, a PVC pipe inside the lead pipe, but the water flows through the PVC instead. I mean, I am wondering now, how big is this lead pipe? Is it like, I don't know, a 10 mil, 20 mil, 30 mil, 50 mil diameter? Because if it's too small, it's a bit difficult to do. And hey, I'm sure that they have tested to no end what that extra chemical does to the human body, but still, just why add an extra thing when hopefully, in theory, you could just get rid of the problem in the first place? It seems like such a band-aid solution instead of just ripping it up and starting again from scratch, which is better in the long run.
But ripping pipes out of the ground is expensive. And in most places, officials wouldn't even know where to start. There's no record of how many lead pipes there are or where they are in any given city.
It is costly. It's going to cost homeowners that do this thousands of dollars that they have to shell out of their own pocket to replace their own side of the service line. And the same for the city. The city of Montreal just announced that its total cost, its estimate for replacing its side of lead service lines is now in the neighborhood of $500 million.
Oh, is that it? $500 million? What? That's nothing. Get that done tomorrow. $500 million? That's like a park. You think of the amount of people that are living in that city. Every single one of them are paying taxes, paying all these different services. Yeah, let's look at that. There's probably, about 2 million people living in Montreal at the moment. And so 500 million divided by 2 million. That is what? $250. And it's not like you have to get that money tomorrow. You can probably get that money over the next 5 years because it takes time to replace it. That's fair enough. Either way, there is no way you can go around saying, oh, it's going to be too expensive, we can't afford it, when each person's probably paying, I don't know, 10 grand on average a year when it's going to cost you $250 to fix their thing?
Total cost, its estimate for replacing its side of lead service lines is now in the neighborhood of $500 million.
We've spoken to a lot of experts for this story, and some of them are calling this a public health crisis. It's going to continue to have long-term effects on Canadians, and I think people need to be held accountable for what's actually happening to people.
Yeah, of course. It's like if you had napalm or something in the water. I'm sure they'd get that out quick smart, but no, as soon as it's just a problem that they go, oh, we don't really know where to start, we don't know where the budget's going to come from, we don't know how much it's going to actually cost, we're just going to leave it to later because we're only 6 times over the health limit. But no, like I said at the start, I wasn't sure if this video was going to be taking me on a positive secret or a negative secret, and it definitely ended up being a negative secret, but that's fine. That was really, really interesting to learn all these different things and how it skewed data, and 31 for goodness sake. And so good on these two, as well as just the rest of their team, but just for enlightening and just bringing this information to the public, doing real testing methods, doing realistic testing methods as well, and just bringing awareness to this issue, because it is a public health issue that has been spanning generations. You know, we have so much development in science that points to all the negative health impacts since it originally put in, and it's fine that it was originally put in. That's nothing we can do about it now. I understand why it was put in. What I don't understand is why it is seemingly covert now and just not money going into it. Like I said, $500 million, who cares? When it's in the entire population's interest to get a problem solved, you would think that it would get done pretty rapidly, especially when the funding is most likely there, or I don't know how it wouldn't be. And so yeah, it's just an insane thing. It should be fixed tomorrow. But anyway, in saying that, I reckon I'm going to call it there. So thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to the YouTube algorithm things down below. Also, if this is the first video of mine that you are watching and you've managed to put up with my croaker voice throughout the entire thing, make sure to go check out any other ones I've done, or hey, maybe even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.